Hello, I'm recording this video and I'm filming the voiceover. Oh, okay. Oh no, she's gone. Okay. Anyway, that's fine. I'm recording this voiceover right now for the research part of this video, and I realized the intro I recorded, the audio is garbage. So, you know, I'm just trying to upgrade it a little bit from like garbage to like paper recycling level. So that's like from here to here. So this is my attempt at that. And I'm sorry it's really shaky. Sorry in general, I guess. Anyway, I made this video because I love RawBeautyKristi. Like, she's my queen. She's my everything. I think she is just like I can't even express it in words how much I like her and how much I like love her. And I'm just really happy that she's pregnant. Do you know what I mean? Because like that means like she's gonna populate the world with incredible people, because I just feel like she's gonna be an amazing mom. I'm getting off track here. Anyway, so she, in her like update video about her fertility journey and pregnancy and stuff, mentioned how someone asked her if the keto diet was the reason that she was able to get pregnant. And this is what she said.
Now I'm gonna get into your questions to see if I maybe missed something. So I'm genuinely curious in my noggin about whether you suspect eating majorly keto helped regulate your ovulation and therefore it allowed this pregnancy to happen. I mean, I can't speculate. All I can say is that after losing the weight with keto, and probably could have happened with anything where I actually lost weight, and I think weight loss in general can bring back cycles, you know? I don't know that it's necessarily keto, but I know that after I did lose the weight, I started having regular periods. But I can tell you, 7 years ago, I lost 30 pounds and I wasn't eating keto. I was just eating a regular, relatively healthy diet. Lost 30 pounds. I was actually at a lower weight than when I got down to my lowest weight on keto, and my cycle never came back then. So maybe it did have to do with low carb. You know, I don't know. I can't speculate, and no doctor will, you know, ever give me that answer. They don't know. And even still, my cycles didn't return. Maybe it's just age. Maybe naturally PCOS starts to go away a little bit as you get older. Maybe it was keto. I honestly wish I had the answer, because I wish I was able to help anybody who wants to get pregnant to do so.
So as you can see, it's not clear, right? Was it the keto diet? Was it losing weight? It seems like it might be, but there's no way to guarantee that for sure. So I wanted to know more. Yeah, so as I was saying, I wanted to figure out kind of what is the best way to scientifically consider what RawBeautyKristi kind of proposed there, right? So in today's video, I went to PubMed and I used mesh terms so that my search is reproducible, so that if you want to go onto PubMed and search in the same terms, you should theoretically find the exact same papers. If any new papers have been published since I did this search, then you'll see those as well. But yeah, so this is just basically the most credible way that I know to do this search, right? And I have enough training that we can go through these papers together, and you know, we can't form a medical opinion. I can't give you guidance on what you should or shouldn't do, but I can at least read the papers with you and we can kind of just see what's out there. Obviously, you should then go to a medical professional and say, listen, I know this is out there. I want to know if it's good for me. Am I part of the population that will benefit from this? That's that person's decision, right? That's not for me to decide for anybody at all. And I hope that this video helps someone, because I know fertility is a very difficult part of life, whether, you know, you're not sure if you're fertile or not, or you're dealing with it. It's just so incredibly emotional, right? Like, I stopped RawBeautyKristi's video short, but she goes into a very heartfelt and very difficult conversation about fertility. And I recently watched Desi Perkins videos, there are multiple, about the very difficult journey she went through with fertility. And those two are not alone. There's so many women out there, so many, not just women, but like couples, right? Because it's not just, you know, a one person issue. And what they go through is so difficult and so painful. So if there's alternatives out there, or there's a way to help people, you know, it's worth it to look into the research and see what's out there. And yeah, a lot of people are getting pregnant right now. So I hope that in this season of pregnancy, this video is well received and you understand that I am not giving you medical advice. This is not medical advice. This is just reading through PubMed. Hey guys, so this is the beginning of our PubMed search. We're going to PubMed, and then I'm going to use mesh terms so that this search is replicable by anyone. Even you can do this, and you should at least get all of the papers that I found. You might get some new ones. So I'm starting with the ketogenic diet as my first mesh term, and we're going to add that to my search builder. I'm going to put information about mesh terms in the below box, whatever that's called. My second mesh term is pregnancy, right? Because we're trying to see, is the keto diet safe for a pregnant person? And look at all the different types of pregnancy you could search for, including time to pregnancy, which is similar to fertility. We are going to look at fertility later in this video, but I will also make a follow-up video if you are interested. Maybe you want to see more. All right, so keto diet plus pregnancy gave us 13 results. I am going to go through human-based subjects first, and then I'll do like the rats and cows later. You know, might as well work from pregnancy's perspective. All right, so I noticed that out of the 4 papers that come up when you put the human filter, as you'll see in a second, 3 had to do with epilepsy and seizures, and 1 had to do with preventing autism in the child. So let's look at the epilepsy paper first. This is a case series. They look at 2 pregnant women who were epileptic and who used the keto diet while pregnant. 1 used keto, 1 used modified Atkins. And they did it for seizure control during pregnancy, which is considered safe and appropriate management. Their conclusion was that it might be effective, but because they only used 2 subjects, basically, they only looked at 2 people, they wanted to investigate more before they made it a true decision. The next paper had to do with autism. So they were looking at how much does the mother's diet affect autism development and autism exacerbation in the fetus and in the child later on. And so basically they talk about how the maternal diet has a fundamental role in the idiopathogenesis of autism. I don't know what idiopathogenesis means, so off to Google we go. What is idiopathogenesis? I truly needed to research this. The cause and development of a disease or abnormal condition. So now we know, right? They're looking at what does the maternal diet do for the cause of autism in the child. And they mention how basically there might be a relationship. And they found that the mother's diet is a modifiable risk factor for autism in the child. While that's interesting, they don't necessarily mention keto, so we can go back into that paper in a different video. This paper was about adult seizures and epilepsy again. Epilepsy has been known to be a very difficult disease to treat. So they mentioned here that their patients, their subjects were medically refractory, but I, again, didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up. And that basically means their epilepsy was not responding to traditional treatments. And so that's why maybe they used keto as a non-traditional, non-pharmacogenic treatment. All right, so now we're going to look into some of the rat papers and 1 cow paper. So, okay. Gestational ketogenic diet programs, brain structure, and susceptibility to depression and anxiety. So basically, this paper was really interesting because they know that the keto diet can minimize some of the symptoms and some of the depressive behaviors in a human being and an adult. So they wanted to see if that could be maybe transferred on from the maternal person to the fetus and then child and into adulthood. And they said, yes, that is there. And they said it's because of a change in neuroanatomy that the ketogenic fetus experiences because of the ketogenic pregnant person, if that makes sense. And these are the changes. I just highlighted them on the screen. We'll come back into this paper in a different video where I also explain which parts of the brain do what. So this paper had to do with the standard diet versus keto diet and then changes in the body and the brain again. But this is an older paper. And this has actually been quoted by a bunch of less favorably, almost, I don't want to say non-keto, but they're somewhat anti-keto. So people, and I'm going to go into depth about this paper later in the video. All right, now we're on to this paper that has to do with valproic acid. There's 2 papers back to back that have to do with valproic acid and autism. So the link between valproic acid and autism we can go into another time. Obviously, autism causes a lot of difficulties for people. That's why people are, like, researchers are interested in, like, what can help mitigate some of those factors, what can help them live like a better quality of life. So basically, they found, like, these researchers found that the keto diet helped people, like, not people, rats with autism have more energy. That makes sense, though, when you think about, like, what keto does in the body physiologically. And the second paper kind of goes into it with a little bit more detail. I thought this word was very interesting, bioenergetic dysfunction. That's what they say that keto was able to overcome in a way. So in this paper, they're basically looking at 4 groups, and they found that in groups with valproic acid to mimic autism, right, the keto diet did help more than the standard diet. Okay, the next paper has to do with cows, and this is basically like a postpartum cow is like it just gave birth cow, and how does it recover its internal organs and it's like basically the energy source for its internal organs. How does that recover with a keto diet versus a glucogenic diet versus an alfalfa glucogenic diet? And this is so fascinating because I have never thought about this before in my entire life, right? And so I'm like laughing because I genuinely have never thought about cows giving birth and like what they go through afterward. I'm sorry. Maybe you have. I'm really sorry. I just never had before this. So basically they found that the glucogenic feeding strategy had obviously more glycogen stores in the liver, but not necessarily more than the keto. And it was interesting, but I'm actually going to have one of my friends come on and do a video with me. She's a veterinarian, so she can explain it a lot better to us. This is about the keto diet and, again, anti-epileptic behaviors. Basically, though, my issue with this was that the high fat wasn't really keto, though. It was kind of just like moderate fat because it's 55%, whereas in keto, you aim for at least 75%. So I don't know. I had like a little bit of a qualm with this paper. Yeah, I mean, take it for what you will, but you know, if you have more insight into this, why they maybe went with 55 instead of 75, please explain it to me, because I just thought that this was just moderate fat and not really a high fat diet because it seemed like things were more balanced. And then this paper had to do with energy metabolism. It's from 2016, pretty modern still, I would say. And it kind of focuses on how the keto diet basically, I wouldn't say restructures because it's a natural part of your body already, but it focuses on fat adaptation, right? And so I think that's obviously something that people look to the keto diet for. And so the paper investigated this mouse strain, right, where they basically limited the mouse's ability to use like traditional sugar-based or like glucose-based metabolism. And then they tested instead, okay, if someone has this absolutely lethal inability to use glucose, then can they still use the keto diet, and what will that do? So these mice have these fetuses that will die without glucose, right? And because the mother mouse was having a keto diet, the fetus mouse was still able to develop. Obviously, it couldn't sustain life because you still need some glucose in like the real world. It was living off of its mother's, like, you know, fuel. Once it was delivered, then it didn't survive. But while in the womb, it still developed fully, which I think is very interesting. Okay, so that's all for keto and pregnancy. Now we're going to go into keto and fertility, which is what I was very interested in because of RawBeautyKristi. So there's only one paper, and it's the 2013 paper that Abby Sharp references when she was commenting on Keto Connect. This is like where she's commented. Keto Connect then, like, you know, responded to it. And yeah, so I wanted to go deep into this paper. And basically, they talk about how they claim that there's a difference between a regular, like, glucose-fed fetus and a keto diet fetus. But when I actually went in and looked at the data, there's no discernible difference. Like the line, the red line and the blue line, right? Although they drew the trend line to look different, when you look at the data points, they're actually not that different. Do you know what I mean? Like the p-value is really high. The p-value indicates how, like, what I would say is how valuable or credible their difference is, right? And it's not credible. Like they actually don't even want to post the p-value, which is upsetting, right? And I think that it's even more upsetting that people like Abby Sharp and other respected physicians and, well, Abby Sharp's not a physician, but do you know what I mean? Like people are basing their ideas about the keto diet off of this paper when this paper is not necessarily being honest about what it's trying to say. And again, when you look at that star above the peach column, that's basically to say that there was a data point there, right? So that really means when you think about it, right? Like they drew these lines in a way that everything looks different, but it's not actually different. So again, basically my issue with the 2013 paper is that the data is not significant and they drew conclusions without like really, getting into the reality of it. Okay, anyway, so now we're looking at low carbon fertility. And I wanted to go into the full paper. There was only one paper. And it basically said, because fertility is a big issue, right? And it's very difficult. So this paper was just, I would say like a case review where they looked at 7 papers about low carb diets and fertility. And then they tried to put them together. You can see under 2.2, they list the search terms that they used, which I thought was very helpful. Sorry. Okay. So these are the results. They started off with 645 papers. They added on 16 extra, then they removed the copies. And basically after a bunch of process of selection, they ended up with 7 papers. And they said they were small to moderate papers, nothing too extensive, which means obviously we need more research and something more extensive. There was only one paper though that was truly a keto paper. That's what I want to talk about too. It's the Mavropoulos, the first one, with 11 women with PCOS and a BMI greater than 27. Only he or she, I don't know who they are, only they studied a true keto diet. The rest are moderate to low carb. Sorry, I'm recovering. I'm recording under my duvet because I'm trying to get good audio quality, but it's 90 degrees outside and it's 1,000 degrees under this duvet, but it's worth it for audio quality. Okay, so they said that 6 of the 7 papers had a low risk for bias. This is them demonstrating the lower risk for bias. Okay, this is showing hormonal change in the 7 papers or 6 papers. I think it's 6. I don't know. And then they also show ovulation rates. I thought this was interesting, right? Because a huge part of fertility is ovulation rates and hormones. And they are showing, most of them show some improvement through a low carb diet. One thing that I want to talk about was that is, kind of how is the low carb thing valuable, right? And so they mention insulin levels and hormone balance, right? And insulin is a hormone just like other hormones. And so I'm going to do more research on that and come back to you because I don't understand it fully and I do want to. I want to understand insulin sensitivity more and how it relates to fertility. So they do talk about how regardless of whether someone has PCOS, there is some improvement. And their conclusion was there needs to be more research, but that there was an improvement in fertility and pregnancy with low carb. Okay, so now we're going to do low carb and pregnancy because we did low carb and fertility. There were a lot of papers on this, and so I only wanted to focus on human trials, and then I only wanted to do randomized control trials. Okay. Low carb diet for the treatment of gestational diabetes. That is a super difficult thing because if a baby is born from a gestationally diabetic person, it can be very, very heavy and it can be very difficult for both the pregnant person as well as the fetus. So basically they take 152 women with gestational diabetes, they put them into 2 groups, and they consider the carb intake. Again, this was low carb because it's around 40% carbs, but obviously this is much, much higher carbs than a keto diet, right? Because 40% carbs is much more than 5%. So that's why they didn't really find much of a difference between the 40% and the 55% group. I would argue that a 15% difference is not a big enough difference, but that's just my opinion. That's not a fact. All right, so this is another randomized control trial. That is a gold standard in medicine for something to be a randomized control trial. This had 450 participants, 460, and they found that the intervention group that had less carbs had greater weight loss than the control group. They ate the same number of calories, just one had less carbs, one had like more carbs. And a low GI diet improved pregnancy health at 3 months postpartum, like the cow study, and greater levels of weight loss 3 months postpartum. But again, I would say look into like, what does low carb mean? Okay, so this is the effect of a cholesterol lowering diet. I'm not exactly sure how this ended up in our search term. Sometimes mesh terms are finicky, but anyway. So they took 290 non-smoking white women. They had no previous pregnancy complications, and they were all carrying only one fetus, right? And some took a low cholesterol, low saturated fat diet, and some took a higher diet. Okay, so I was actually checking the mesh terms because I was like, how did we end up here? I don't know. Anyway, that paper was interesting. We'll come back to it later at a different time. I didn't really find it to be like conclusive fully. That was why. So this talks about gestational diabetes, glycemic index, and macrosomia. Macrosomia is when the baby is more than 4,000 grams or more than 8 pounds, 13 ounces, which is a very, very big baby. So they said that a low GI diet, which is a low glycemic index diet, which is not necessarily low carb or keto, didn't have as much of an effect as they wanted to see, I guess. I don't know. That one, I mean, that's kind of the issue with some of these mesh terms is like, obviously we can't qualify how many carbs are going to be there, right? So I think that's something to look into. Whew. Okay, so they said again, low glycemics did not reduce the incidence for a large gestational, like diabetic birth, basically. Which makes sense, right? Because you're not necessarily reducing the number of carbs, you're just reducing like the type, kind of. Okay, this is a similar paper, and it said that both low and high carb diets were safe in women giving birth. So this is the impact of the maternal diet on neonatal anthropometry. I don't know how to say that word yet. Still working on that. Neonates whose mothers had a low GI diet, pregnancy had lower thigh circumference. There was no difference between the intervention. Ooh. Okay, so basically they said a maternal low GI diet is safe in pregnancy and may positively impact infant adiposity. Okay, I mean, I don't really know exactly how. I mean, actually, no, I would say we've seen 4 papers so far that have to do with this. And they all are talking about kind of like how to avoid fetal macrosomia. Again, that's a 4,000 gram baby or bigger. So this paper considered 372 women and found that if at 28 weeks gestation, they had gestational diabetes, despite a low GI diet, they also likely had a higher BMI, and that like contributes to excessive weight gain later, and it's very dangerous. This paper looked at 800 women, and basically about half got advice to have a low glycemic index diet, and half received standard maternity care. And they looked at what were the outcomes in trimester 1, 2, and 3 based off of either if someone ate the low glycemic diet or not, right? And so basically they found that dietary intervention, especially in the first trimester, had a beneficial outcome for the pregnant women. We'll go into what low glycemic means in a different video because I feel like there's a lot of people that reference it, and there's other stuff I want to cover in this video because even this paper goes into low glycemic index foods, which does not necessarily mean low carb. So again, this one considers low glycemic index in pregnancy and how that translates to fetal macrosomia. And they said that altering the source of maternal dietary carbs may prove to be valuable in the management of pregnancies where the mother has previously given birth to a very heavy child, over 4,000 grams or over 8 pounds, 13 ounces. So this wasn't fully conclusive, but it is interesting, right? That people are trying this as a means to fix a problem. Okay, so this paper looked at 222 pregnant women with a BMI above 30 before they were even pregnant. And it looked at, okay, if we give them a standard diet versus a lower carb diet, then what's going to happen once they give birth, right? And so they found that in obese women, even those without gestational diabetes but impaired glucose tolerance, a lower carb intake at moderate levels in late gestation is associated with lower fat mass in their offspring at birth. So I thought that was interesting and probably beneficial to avoid macrosomia. So the impact of maternal nutrition on pregnancy outcome doesn't matter what pregnant eat. I couldn't read the entire paper, so I didn't want to go into it. But this paper from Ireland looked at if you give someone a single session of guidance counseling while they're pregnant, how does that affect the outcome? And they said a single educational session was not effective and you need more than one session. Okay, so this is our last randomized control trial. This paper looked at 77 women who were at risk to develop gestational diabetes, and it considered what would happen if you gave them conventional carb diets and versus a low glycemic diet, right? So they were evaluating glucose tolerance management and body weight management in women who in previous births had gestational diabetes. Again, just to explain. And they found that in these women, lowering the low GI diets had a better outcome. And they defined that better outcome as better glucose tolerance and less body weight. And the last paper that somehow ended up here had to do with standard deviation, so that's not really relevant. Now for a review of everything we went over. A second mushroom. Okay, and so we got 4 human papers out of the 13, right? So there were 13 total, and there were 4 human papers, and out of the 4, 1 was about autism spectrum disorder, and 3 were about epilepsy, right? And so the 3 epileptic papers found that basically there was too small of a sample study, right? Very, very low patient population. And they also found that in general, in the few cases that they studied, the keto diet was beneficial for seizure control. So keto. Again, though, I want to emphasize that the primary learning thing there was that there was a very low patient population, right? Remember, there was one paper that only had 2 subjects. 2 is not enough to formulate a genuine opinion or an idea, right? And then the autism spectrum disorder paper, it was linking maternal diet to factors that lend to a fetus and child developing the variety of traits that are found in autism, right? So the maternal diet linked to autism spectrum disorder, I would say exacerbation. The second thing that we searched was the keto diet and fertility, right? And at that point, I think we only came up with 1 paper, which was the 2013 rat paper, right? And it talked about how there was a change in neuroanatomy in the fetus and also a change in physiology, because there was a change in organ systems and in organ size, right? So changed body ratio. So my commentary on that was that the data was not significant, or was not significantly different. And we could see that from the bar graphs, as well as there was a line graph. I felt like both of those were not statistically significant, which is likely why they didn't share the full data. So if anything, I would want that paper done again, because when we went to the 2015 paper from the Keto Diet and Pregnancy Search, there was 9 rat papers, right? And one of the rat papers talked about how there were pregnant rats that were fed the keto diet, and their offspring were less likely to have anxiety and depression. I don't know if you guys remember that paper, right? And so the reason that those rats whose mothers had the keto diet were less likely to have anxiety and depression was because of that same change in neuroanatomy, as well as they were more likely to be physically active because of their cerebellar activity and like changes in their cerebellum. So we will revisit the 2015 rat paper in a different time and compare it to a few others. There'll be a different video probably coming up next week. After that, we searched for low carbohydrate diets, right? So low carb diets. And then we looked at pregnancy, which didn't have that many results. And then we also looked at fertility, which had a tremendous number of results, right? So far out of fertility, we have only looked at RCTs, right? So what's left for us to look at? We're going to look at meta-analyses, and we're going to look at clinical studies. And until we go through these two, I'm not going to review the randomized controlled trials. So the last thing I want to review is low carb diets and pregnancy. I would say we could not make any true generalizations off of what we learned from the various diets. I would say that we read 5 papers that had to do with macrosomia, or having a very high weight baby at birth, right? So if you remember, macrosomia was a baby that weighs greater than 4,000 grams, or that also means greater than 8 pounds, 13 ounces, right? And so the incidence, or maybe you could say the risk of macrosomia, decreased in a low carb diet or a low glycemic index diet. So what I want to do is, in a later video, we're going to go over what do these low GI diets mean versus low carb versus keto, right? So that's for a future video. We're going to go over that. So basically, my big takeaway from this would be that there were only 4 papers available that had to do with the keto diet and pregnancy, which is kind of concerning to me because you would assume that there would be more with how popular keto is, but there wasn't. Out of the 4, 3 were about epilepsy, which is not that surprising because keto has been used for seizure control for decades. And 1 was about autism, which I thought was interesting. Our second search of the keto diet and fertility brought up the infamous rat paper, which Abby Sharp has gone into, Keto Connect has gone into, there are other people on YouTube who have gone into it, and I didn't think that the data was statistically significant, and I also felt like the change in neuroanatomy that they mentioned in the fetus was later verified by a 2015 paper, and that 2015 paper showed that that change in anatomy actually benefited the fetus in that it had less anxiety and less depression as a full adult, right? So I'd be interested to see if anybody has replicated that 2013 paper and could verify their research, as well as maybe a development or an update on their neuroanatomy findings, right? Because if a maternal keto diet could prevent anxiety and depression in a child, that could be life-changing for so many people. So if that is true and there is incidence of that, I would love to see that revisited. But as for now, I would not say that that paper was, like, it's a good starting point, but it's not conclusive of anything. And then finally, when we looked at low-carb diets and pregnancy, we found that it's being used as a tool to manage gestational diabetes as well as preventing macrosomia in the fetus. And there's still a lot more work to be done. I wouldn't say that it was fully conclusive because personally, I wasn't convinced that low carb was any more beneficial than just like a moderate reduction in calories diet. You know what I mean? So I didn't feel like that was as convincing. And in terms of fertility, that's going to be the next few sets of videos. I think at least 1 video to cover the meta-analyses and clinical studies. And then I'm going to make a 3rd video to go over PCOS. The reason PCOS needs its own video is because there are thousands of research papers, not just hundreds, because PCOS is so difficult to manage, and it can be just so life ruining for a woman or for a person. I don't want to gender assume, but yeah. So, okay, that's what's going on. So next video will be about fertility and low carb diets and what the research says. And then after that, we'll go into PCOS and keto. So I hope today was useful for you and that you enjoyed it. And yeah, bye.